Hi everyone, welcome to Steve's Garage. In today's video I'll be covering the removal and installation of both the oil pan and oil pickup tube on a Mark IV Volkswagen 1.8T. This is one of those jobs where if you're going to do one, you should probably do the other. In my case, I wanted to replace the pickup tube, and my original plan was to replace the oil pan with one from Forge, but that didn't work out because of some unforeseen fitment issues. If you're looking for information on just one part of the process, I've included chapters to get you where you need to go. The other thing you should think about doing while you're here is the turbo oil return line, since you have to disconnect that from the pan anyway. I've got a separate video for that, you can check it out here. This job doesn't really require any crazy tools, but you definitely need some patience. A new oil pan if you want, but it's not necessary. Oil pan silicone, in my case I'm using Durco HT, and I can say that I've had zero issues with the pan leaking, so I can vouch for this if applied correctly. A pickup tube and O-ring, I don't recommend reusing these if you're taking the pan off anyway. 16mm socket, 10mm socket, 5mm Allen driver. I definitely recommend a ball head style, especially a long one, because it'll just make your life a lot easier. A ratchet and extension, 10mm wrench, a torque wrench. An impact gun or breaker bar is definitely going to be helpful, but not necessary depending on the size ratchet you have. Those 16mm bolts can be a little tight, and that's what I used it for. You don't have to drain the oil, but it'll make your life a lot easier and cleaner if you do, so I'd start by doing that. If you're not replacing the oil return line, just remove the two 10mm bolts that are holding it to the pan and let it hang there. From there, you can remove the three 16mm bolts that are going through the bell housing and into the oil pan. This is what you'll need that impact or breaker bar for, as they're on there pretty tight. Once those three 16mm bolts are out, there are an additional 20 bolts holding the pan to the block. They're all a 10mm socket or 5mm Allen like I mentioned earlier. You will need an extension or long driver to get the four that are hiding between the oil pan and the transmission. You're working blind, it's really not fun, but they're up there and they do need to come out. My method was to go around and crack each bolt loose and then slowly back them all off. That way I could slowly lower the pan, not put any strain on the threads or the bolts or anything like that. Once I got them all out, the pan was actually stuck, and I assume that's because it's an original pan and there was quite a bit of corrosion around all the edges. I did have to use a pry bar to pop it off, but you really want to be careful doing that because you don't want to mar any of the mating surfaces. With the pan off, you can now move on to the oil pickup tube. The oil pickup tube uses the same style bolts, 10mm socket or 5mm Allen. Those should come right out, and the pickup tube should come right out as well. Install the new O-ring, install the pickup tube, tighten the bolts down. The torque spec is 132 inch-pounds or 11 foot-pounds. This is one of those items where I didn't want to over-tighten it, which is why I'm using this little torque wrench. You want to make sure you get this spec right and you don't damage anything when you reassemble it. There you go, it's on there. Now it's time to clean up the mating surface on the block. I used a plastic scraper and nylon brush because there really wasn't that much residue left over and I didn't want to take a chance on messing the surface up. Yours may look different, but at the end of the day you just want a clean, dry surface for the oil pan to seal against. I would have liked to clean up all the corrosion around the edges, but I didn't have the tools to do it, and the pan wasn't actually leaking. I can also report back that I haven't had any leaks, so I think as long as there's no corrosion on the mating surface itself, you'll be okay. On the other hand, maybe you're removing the oil pan because it was leaking from that mating surface, and if that's the case, I would absolutely take a little more time to make sure that surface is nice and clean. You don't want to put everything back together just to have it keep leaking. If you're not installing a new oil pan and you're reusing the old one, you'll have to clean that surface up as well. In my case, it was a little more work than the block was because it seemed like all the sealant stuck to the oil pan. I don't know what your experience will be. In the video, I'm using a razor blade, but I don't recommend that if you don't trust yourself. You can damage the surface, and that's the last thing you want when you're trying to reinstall something. If you want to play it safe, use a plastic razor blade, scraper, or brush, and that should safely get all the old sealant off. I'm not going to bore you cleaning the entire pan, but this is not even close to finished. All of the sealant residue has to be off, all the oil residue has to be off. Remember that this surface has to be completely clean in order for it to be resealed. The following footage is with the Forge pan, but it doesn't matter which pan you're installing, the application of the sealant is all the same. Durco HT sets up in about 30 minutes, so if you're going to do this, make sure you're ready to install before you start applying it. The Bentley manual states a 2 to 3mm bead of sealant around the edge. You don't want too much or it'll squeeze out in the oil pan and could clog the pickup tube. Less is more with this stuff. Once it's time to install the pan, you'll want to run all the 10mm bolts up first. Go around the oil pan diagonally as you snug them up and don't do a final tighten. At that point, install the bell housing bolts, again snug but not tight. Go back and torque all the pan bolts to 11 foot-pounds and then torque the bell housing bolts to 33 foot-pounds. I'm sorry I don't have exact footage of this procedure, but I think you've got it if you made it this far. What you're watching is me figuring out that the forge pan doesn't fit correctly. I stopped filming once I pulled the pan off, and then I fought with Forge to take the pan back, and I was just annoyed by the whole process, which is why this is the footage I've got. If you're interested in seeing the issues I ran into, leave a comment and I can make a quick video explaining all that. I won't do it here. Reinstall your drain plug, bolt that return line back up. If you've waited 30 minutes for the sealant to cure, you can add some oil, start the car, and make sure everything is sealed up properly. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave it below. I try to reply to everyone. If you enjoyed this video, think about checking out some of my other Mark IV Volkswagen tutorials, and don't forget to subscribe for future videos. Thanks so much for watching, everyone.